It is a difficult task to articulate such an experience in language. One finds oneself in a disturbing state of consciousness. The usual functions and personality break down, and one is barely able to function in the world. All energy and intention are almost completely absorbed by this experience and the struggle against panic. The world narrows, thoughts swirl, and beyond that, it feels as if you are distancing yourself from your own body and your surroundings, as if everything around you has become a distant, foreign landscape and you are observing yourself from afar. In this episode of Towards the Obscure, we will broaden our perspective on fear and panic. First, we look at the origins of pan and panic, date back to the ancient times, and then we examine Paul Tillich's theological and philosophical perspective on fear and panic. In contrast to the clinical view that is widespread today, we do not focus on the physical and psychological symptoms of panic. Instead, we take a few steps back to get a bigger picture that better reflects both the phenomenology and the ontology. The aim here is not to rank one perspective as superior than the other, but rather to get a different picture that includes the aspects of panic that are difficult to describe. Words alone are not enough to do this. We need ideas that can amplify the experience, instead of viewing the experience purely rationally and thus impoverishing it. We want to preserve its vivid richness. In this way, the experience of panic can be more deeply understood and recognized for what it is, an intense inner experience that expands our reality. Part 1. The essence of anxiety and fear. Before we delve deeper into the structure of panic, let's first consider what gives us a reason for panic: anxiety and fear. These two terms are often used interchangeable. Since Freud, we know that there is an essential difference. Paul Tillich was a renowned German-American theologian and philosopher whose work had a profound influence on modern theology and philosophy. He explores the difference between both terms in his book, The Courage to Be. In short, we can say, fear has an object, and anxiety does not. Fear can be faced, understood, analyzed, fought, and overcome. We fear certain things in life, certain animals, flying, public speaking, illness, or the suspicious person who walks behind us at night on a lonely street. However, anxiety is fundamental to dread. It is the element that connects all types of fear. It is argued that anxiety is part of being. Anxiety is a state in which being becomes aware of the possibility of its non-being, or more briefly, anxiety is the existential awareness of non-being. Thus, fear can be seen as a projection of anxiety. Fear is a symptom and anxiety is a cause. Since anxiety is part of our human consciousness, it cannot be fought in itself. We cannot erase or destroy or deny it. Those who encounter it are helplessly at its mercy insofar as it is pure anxiety. Through fear, the projection of anxiety, the idea of the finitude is amplified and moves closer to the person. Previously, the anxiety might not have been conscious, but through fear we become aware of the finitude. These projections can sometimes correspond to reality, for example when the person who follows us down the street at night actually has destructive intentions, but at other times it might only be the existential anxiety of non-existence that appears in our consciousness through fear. Non-existence is not only equated to death, but also encompasses other forms of threat. A differentiation helps us to understand how the awareness of nothingness threatens existence and how this anxiety appears in our lives. In his book, Tillich describes 3 types of anxiety that are expressed through non-existence. On the ontec level, we have anxiety of fate and death. On the spiritual level, we experience the anxiety of emptiness and meaninglessness. And in the realm of morality, we encounter the judge of contamination, the anxiety of guilt. The anxiety of fate and death. This anxiety is an inevitable part of every being. We cannot protect ourselves from death, just as we cannot protect ourselves from fate. Therefore, this anxiety is called ontic. Both are higher powers that have a say in our lives and leave their mark. Attempts to eliminate them with arguments fail. We could argue that there is a life after death, but this does not make the anxiety go away because the end of our biological existence is a fact, and everyone is aware of this. Fate can strike at any time. This makes the anxiety of fate strong. We cannot calculate it. Fate could be waiting around every corner and end our present existence. The anxiety of emptiness and meaninglessness. A life that is meant for us, but it is not lived. That is the emptiness and meaninglessness Tillich is talking about here. Attempts to avoid the spiritual anxiety can be seen in fanatical convictions that give a person meaning in life. The fanatical person did not find their conviction through natural development, but was driven to it by anxiety. Whenever their values and fanatism are criticized, the person will become defensive, because insight into the actual emptiness or meaninglessness would bring about this anxiety. Having an answer to the meaning of life does not necessarily mean being able to put it into words, but rather living something that gives one an authentic fullness in life. The anxiety of guilt and contamination. At a certain point we are asked what we have done with our lives. Paul Tillich writes, "He who questions him is his judge, and that is he himself, he who at the same time stands against himself." This question gives rise to the anxiety of guilt and damnation. With our creative power, we bear the responsibility to make ourselves what we should be. However, with the freedom that comes with this power, it also happens that we miss our destiny, that we might not live according to the demands of our inner life, but choose a different path based on external expectations and convenience. Ontic anxiety manifests itself in the omnipresent threat to existence posed by the inevitable end of life and the unpredictable intervention of fate, whereby non-existence is experienced as an inescapable reality. Similarly, the anxiety of the emptiness and meaninglessness, as well as the anxiety of guilt and damnation, reflect the threat to being posed by non-being by pointing to the absence of meaning and the possible failure of one's own existence. Thus, the encounter with naked anxiety is at the same time an encounter with nothingness. Nothingness has no structure, no support, no points of reference, therefore we have no choice but to lose ourselves in it. This is exactly what happens when panic seizes the soul. A part of us is lost in it. We seem to have no control over what is happening. Something greater takes over our autonomy. Anyone who has experienced a panic attack knows that there's little one can do to escape it. It almost seems as if every attempt only intensifies it. According to Paul Tillich, anxiety, unlike fear, cannot disappear. Anxiety is a present reality. Medication does not make anxiety disappear. It merely elevates its symptoms. Even therapy does not make anxiety disappear. At best, it teaches us to accept it. This is one of the central arguments in the book The Courage to Be. The existential anxiety has an ontological character and cannot be eliminated, but must be taken into the courage to be. Existential anxiety is part of our being. When we experience panic, we might also experience fear, but it is certainly an encounter with anxiety itself. Not just any kind of encounter, but one that makes us tremble, that brings the potential reality of non-existence so close to us that we can literally taste it. an incomparable experience that takes us both into the depths and to the radical revelation of the soul. It is a revelation, a numinous experience, something that lies beyond the profane, beyond the everyday life. The numinous is a term coined by the theologian Rudolf Otto. It defines a special kind of sacred, or today we might say spiritual, experience that can both be frightening and attractive. This numinous experience opens a door to a depth that tends to be hidden in everyday life. Depression, post-traumatic stress, and phobias can be precursors to this, but not necessarily. Paul Tillich describes that there are people who are simply more sensitive to it. Their skin is thinner, they feel more, and those there is not much between them and the naked anxiety. Non-being is in fact always present, and the sensitive person is more aware of this than the average person. Marie-Louise von Franz was a Swiss psychologist who worked closely with C.G. Jung. She is known for her work in the field of Jungian psychology and her analysis of fairy tales and alchemy. In one of her lectures, she tells the story of a French man and an Englishman who sat together in the trench during the First World War. The Frenchman nervously smoked one cigarette after another and paced back and forth, while the Englishman sat calmly and finally asked the Frenchman mockingly, "Are you afraid? Are you nervous?" And the Frenchman said, "If you were as afraid as I am, you would have run away long ago." There are people that are so thick-skinned that they don't feel anxiety, even if they were to encounter it through the barbaric threat of war. However, this says nothing about their courage. Sensitive people have to muster much more courage to endure such a threat. Therefore, for some people, panic is not the result of their personal history, they are simply closer to existential anxiety. Tillich goes on to explain that these people also have greater capacity for creation. They are more connected to nothingness and those to the realm where everything is one. The vacuum from which every idea, every person, every creation, every thought springs. The realm of the potentials. Part 2. The connection between Pan and panic. In ancient times, panic attacks were often considered supernatural or divine phenomena. In ancient Greeks, for example, the god Pan, from whom the word panic is derived, is the one who intervenes in the essence of the person. Understanding the etymological origin will help us to better understand why panic is not only the pathological phenomenon, but also a human experience through which one experiences something profound and which therefore has value that should be emphasized. In the book Pan and the Nightmare, James Hillman refers to an article by Donald Brinkman. Brinkman has already pointed to the bankruptcy of all theories of panic that attempt to deal with it sociologically, psychologically, historically, and not in its own terms. The right terms, Brinkman says, are mythological. It is no exception for psychological phenomena to be named after a god or figure from Greek mythology. To name just a few here, there is, for example, the Oedipus complex, panic disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, the Adonis complex, nymphomania, and all kinds of phobias refer to the god Phobos. Or any manic behavior traits speak of the spirits that personify madness, insanity, and frenzied ecstasy. Even if these stories are not consciously present in our society, they still reign supreme whether we believe in them or not. They are part of nature, a force that determines our actions. As Brinkman says, attempts to describe panic using only symptomatic terms fail because their phenomenology does not do justice to real life. That is why it is helpful to look at Greek mythology surrounding the god Pan. Pan is depicted as a creature with horns, hooves, a goat's body, and a pan flute, similar to how we imagined the devil since Christianity. However, this depiction and comparison highlight a conflict between Christianity and the polytheistic culture of the ancient Greek Empire, which I will not go in further here. What is important, however, is that Pan is not purely evil, as we normally imagine the devil to be. Pan instead embodies a wide spectrum of generative, preservative, and destructive aspects. Pan is fundamentally seen as the god of nature. This includes the realm of the instincts and fertility, but Pan also often is associated with masturbation, panic, nightmares, and even rape. Pan's habitat is the nature of Arcadia, which is both a physical and a psychological space. The Orphic hymns to Pan tell us that the god of instincts can be found in the caves of Arcadia, the realm that provides access to the upper and lower worlds. The upper world is our world, the world of order and life. The underworld is the obscure realm, and such a place also exists in our psyche. This is the area where psyche and the body collide, the inner and the outer worlds. Instinct find their place there, as they are half conscious and half unconscious. If we place ourselves in this area, we would have one foot in consciousness and the other in the unconscious. We stand on the edge of both worlds, the underworld, the world of the dead, and the world of the living. On one side we look into the darkness, and on the other side we look into the light. This is the place of Pan and those of panic. When we panic, we break through the layers of our everyday perception and gain access to deeper layers of our being. These layers contain not only non-being, but also forces that are generative, destructive, and often hidden in our own nature. In the same vein, James Hillman continues in his commentary on Brink's work. Brinkman has already pointed out to the bankruptcy of all theories of panic that attempt to deal with it sociologically, psychologically, or historically, and not in its own terms. The right terms, Brinkman says, are mythological. Then panic will no longer be regarded as a physiological defense mechanism or an inadequate reaction or an abaissement de nouveau mental, but will be seen as a right response to the numinous. One of the central arguments is that panic is not just pathological or irrational reaction, but a natural human response to the numinous, an encounter with something that transcends our mundane, everyday lives and existence. Panic can affect people with relevant histories or people with a certain sensitivity to the existential anxiety of being. When we experience panic, even if it has a frightening object, we do not just react to it, but confront the essence of our existence, the conflict between being and not being. Viewed in this way, panic is not a failure or a sign of weakness, but a rightful and significant encounter with the numinous. James Hillman's insight deepened this understanding by emphasizing the mythological nature of panic and its connection to the god Pan. Pan as a representation of nature and instinct, for the body the interface between consciousness and unconscious, the known and the unknown, the light and the dark. In moments of panic we are thrown into this intermediate realm. We experience an altered perception and gain access to deeper layers of our psyche. Perhaps we are not doing panic justice if we only refer it to the obvious symptoms and try to treat them. So perhaps there is an added value in this experience, a wisdom that we can draw from, something that helps us to deepen our lives and those gives a meaning, instead of just fighting them and eradicating them. Hello everyone, my name is Christian and I'm the creator of this channel, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If there was something in the video that resonated with you and you would like to explore your own questions, then feel free to book a free counseling session with me. The link you will find down in the description, and I hope I see you for the next video.